My name is Karen Eisengruber. I am the Vice President of Customer Strategy here at Fairygodboss. I am so thrilled to have the opportunity to connect today with Zohra Yafai on a topic that I think many of us talk quite a bit about, bringing your whole self to work. Zohra leads the global recruitment organization that supports the talent growth for one of the world's largest multinational technology companies, and also one of our platinum sponsors of this event, Cisco Systems. She has proven experience from design to execution for HR and workforce solutions, and an extensive corporate recruitment background that helps to power an inclusive future for Cisco. So Zohra, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Karen. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Why don't you just start by telling everyone a little bit about yourself and your background?
Absolutely. I can start by explaining why I'm sitting here in beautiful sunny California, why I have a British accent. So I actually started out my my life in my father is native to Kenya in East Africa. So I started out my life living there. And then when I was a child, we moved to the UK because my mother is English and Irish heritage. I'm a bit of a mixed bag, I'm going to be honest. And I, kind of went through my education, my formal education in the UK. And then about 6.5 years ago, I had a really good conversation with my boss at the time. And she was like, would you like to come and support our Americas organization, just for 18 months, 2 years maybe. And I fell in love with the work culture here and, kind of having that proximity to some of my other colleagues. And so I've been in the US and in California for the last 6.5 years as well. So, I kind of went through college and university trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I landed in a recruitment agency. I didn't even know that kind of work existed. I didn't know that finding people jobs was a job. I loved it. I got so excited about it. I'm picking up the phone, giving people a job offer, and just finding that the most powerful thing. I really felt a connection to that work. And then about 15 years ago, I was lucky enough to join Cisco. So I've been here for quite a while. But that's a little bit about me.
Wow, what an exciting background too. I mean, in addition to being at an incredible organization for such a long time, also coming over as new to the U.S. for a short what was phased as a short period of time and staying. So I love that. Well, our topic today is around the conversation about bringing your whole self to work, and I think because of the buzz around this topic, there's a lot of strong feelings as to what that actually means, especially for marginalized groups. So if you had to distill it down for us, what does bringing your whole self to work really mean for you?
Yeah, and you're right. I think we hear it a lot. And what does it mean? It just means being yourself and being comfortable when you're being yourself. And I think we've had a scenario over the last few years and I think the previous group was talking about this, right? In terms of like the authenticity of hearing some toxic phrases like fake it until you make it, right? And things like that. And I think it's really hard to think you've got to show up to work with a different face and then you just transform when you go home. And I think what the pandemic has done in particular over the last couple of years is really blurred that line. A lot of people, not everybody, was able to work from home and shelter from the pandemic at home, and that hugely blurred the lines, right? So sometimes I would join my leadership meeting with my boss with my 2-year-old on my lap, right? And it was just the reality of what was going on that day. And I could either choose to, not be honest about that's the life I actually have, right? Or just be honest about it. And then that explains, kind of so much more. So I think, it really is just being honest and true to who you are and being comfortable and knowing, what your strengths are and not apologizing for them, or knowing what you need to develop and not apologizing for that. So I think that's the other part of what I'd want to say. Early in my career, I had a boss tell me, I went into his office, I was super upset about something, and I was crying, right? And that boss told me, you should read this book. It's called Women Who Worry Too Much. And honestly, I took that feedback and I was like, oh, I'm a worrier. I'm going to label myself as this worrier. I worry too much. I worry too much, right? Because I believe that advice that I was given. And now I realize, hang on a second, that's my strength. My strength is that I look ahead, that I anticipate and I forecast. It's the way my brain is wired. It's why I'm good at my job. And so that's what I mean when I say bring your whole self to work. It's like you can carry like a badge like that someone can give you as like a negative thing. And actually, I just unapologetically own it now. Like I do that at home with my husband. It drives him mad. I'm thinking ahead. I'm thinking through like, what do we need to do? What do we need to buy? Whose birthday's coming up?
Mhm.
It's what makes me good. And so I think that's the other piece of what I want to say about like, what does that mean? It just means being yourself and recognizing it has value in this world and we need to
Mhm.
exploit it. That, you know, in terms of for yourself, you need to be like, I'm good at that. I'm going to use that because that's
Mhm.
what's going to make me stand out and be unique. Right.
Yeah, I think that resonates with me so much. I have the same conversation with my husband. It also makes him a little batty that, I started planning for our Christmas travel for this Christmas, last Christmas. So it's constantly thinking ahead. I love that. I love that you took that and made that a positive too. I think, one of the things that you said also is, we hear these like toxic phrases, this, fake it till you make it. One of the things that I often find is that, especially early on in our careers as women, or men even, we're encouraged to find our passion in our job. And it leaves a lot of people, and I know I felt this, really disconnected and dissatisfied with what we're doing because we feel like we're not fulfilling our passion in our work. And, sometimes a job is just a job. So, what advice would you give instead?
Yeah, that's a great one, Karen. Anyone that knows me or anyone that has been mentored by me knows I genuinely detest that advice. I think it's one of the most, talk about setting yourself up for failure, right? If you really feel like you've got to show up every day and be super passionate about the job, right? I think how I think about that is you have to find a company or make your own company. Like my husband's an entrepreneur. Like you've got to find the thing that you do every day, whatever that job looks like for you.
Mhm.
To work for an organization that I think you believe in, like ultimately their higher purpose. I love Cisco's purpose, powering an inclusive future for all with our technology, with like what I do in terms of people strategy. Like I love that. I can connect to that. Now, when I'm sitting in a room for an hour poring over my budget spreadsheet, like, am I passionate about that? No, I'm not, right? And
Mhm.
sometimes I can have whole days like that. I have some days where I get to do stuff like this, and like, that gets me really excited. But there's days where I do stuff like that. And if I felt like if I got to the end of the day and I sat down to have a drink with my friends and I was like, oh, that was a bit of a blah day. And they were like, wow, well, then you should quit your job because you should be passionate about what you're doing. You can find
Mhm.
yourself in kind of dangerous territory, right? I think you have to take the short term and the long term view in how you think about that. I tell people that I manage and mentor, you need to like do three things. You need to go to a coffee shop and talk about like coffee shop, wine bar, or I don't know, park, bench, somewhere that's not your office, not your home. And you need to write three lists. What am I good at? And then what am I strong at? What are my strengths? What am I good at doing? And then the third one being, and what does the market reward? Because let's be honest, we
Mhm.
work for financial reward as much as we work for other reward. And I think at any time in your career, you have to look at the balance of those things, right?
Mhm.
And you have to sometimes say, I need to make money right now. My financial situation means I need to make money right now, so I need to do the thing that the market rewards. And then
Mhm.
other times you can say, I'm going to do the thing that I'm strong at because I know I can do it and I can nail that job because I'm good at that. And the thing
Mhm.
that you're good at might not be the thing that you love doing,
Mhm.
right? And we have to start recognizing that at points in your career, if you're going to work for 50 years, the things suddenly that you become really good at and strong at,
Mhm.
you may start to not love doing them as much. And then you've got to start thinking about, well, what else do I love doing, but I'm not strong at it? That's your development path.
Mhm.
And I think you can get passionate about that, about your journey. But like, yeah, sitting in a room doing a budget spreadsheet, don't worry if you're not passionate. But I mean, some people out there, thank goodness, are passionate about that. And I rely on those people every day. But don't worry if that's not the thing you're passionate about. You should be passionate about owning your journey. And ideally, finding an organization or finding a job context in which you're excited about the purpose. What is that organization trying to do in the world? Because that's
Mhm.
what I wake up every day and get excited about, my opportunity to kind of help Cisco achieve a inclusive future for all. That's important to me.
Mhm. I absolutely love that. And I'm a list person, so I love the lists. And I think reevaluating those lists is super important too, because as you progress, as you mentioned in your career, those things can change over time and should. So I love that's fantastic. So, we're also talking about authenticity. And I think for some people, especially if they're like through this great reshuffle, they've started a new job, they're maybe potentially completely virtual. What can they do, or what are some tactical or conscious ways that our audience can be more intentional about showing up with authenticity? Or how, if you're not used to, if you feel like you're living kind of that double life, how do you start? Where do you get started?
Yeah, and I must say I have a huge amount of empathy for people that have started during the pandemic and are trying to connect in this kind of virtual perspective. And it's something we're talking about at Cisco a lot in terms of we believe in a hybrid future.
Mhm,
And so, if we're going to have some folks in the office and some folks joining remotely, how does this wonderful platform that we're on, how does our technology allow for that? And so I do think organizations have to think about this, because as an individual, you can kind of show up in kind of do your thing, but the broader context has got to exist that allows you to be successful in trying to show up in essentially what is a hybrid world.
mhm,
I think tactically, when it comes to showing up authentically, you kind of have to explain your behavior to people, right? So what I mean by that is explain who you are, talk about who you are. We have this wonderful tool at Cisco where we can go in and take a little bit of an assessment, and it gives you and your boss and maybe even some of the people you work with some helpful understandings of like what is the makeup of your personality, right? Like how, and that thing is so scary. The standout assessment is so scarily accurate. I am always like really cynical when I take things like that, but I take
mhm,
it, and I can then explain to somebody if we're like struggling on a meeting, to say, look, I'm a pioneer creator. The way I see the world is, come with me, we'll figure this thing out, don't worry about it. Like, the future's bright, let's go there, right? I'm anticipating and I'm thinking through the things that need to be done, but I find it really helpful a little bit sometimes to be given those tools to help explain who I am a little bit, because that's really hard in a virtual context. And so if someone's thinking, gosh, Sora is like pie in the sky on this project, me explaining that that's how my brain works, I think is a
mhm,
really helpful way of having someone go, oh, okay, I'm more of this kind of okay, I see, well, hang on a second, we're on two different ends of the spectrum, but working together, we could be really powerful in this. Let's play to our strengths.
mhm,
So I think you've got to explain who you are, and you've got to be brave in doing that. That is a brave thing to do, right?
mhm,
I also think you've got to, kind of like, I love the Brene Brown phrase around marble buddies, right? And like find those friends at work
mhm,
that you really trust. I have a few of those, right? When you finish a particularly hard meeting and you hang up and you're like, oh my gosh, what is going on? What is everyone thinking? You need to have that. If
mhm,
you don't have those marble buddies, and if anyone's listening and you think, what's a marble buddy? I would highly recommend you to listen to Brene Brown about that. But it's essentially those friends that you
mhm,
trust, that you would give your marbles to if you were a kid. And it's hard. It's so hard to make those friends during the pandemic. I was in a job for 9 months before the pandemic hit, about
mhm,
9 months. So I just started making, I was running one of Cisco's acquisitions, Cisco Meraki. I was running their talent acquisition team, and I was just starting to make some friends. And the pandemic hit, and I was like, I'm going to keep on doing virtual coffees. I'm going to keep these things going so that I can have that authenticity of people that I can just show up and have that like
mhm.
realness with, if that makes sense.
Yes, of course. And that kind of leads us into the next conversation, which is, and you've kind of answered it, the importance of work friendships. I think a lot of people during this great reshuffle have found themselves com again in this completely virtual or partly virtual world where they're trying to coordinate, how do we get to that water cooler place that we had in the real world, or in the in-person world? So what are some suggestions? You mentioned virtual coffees. What else can we do to really get to know the people that we're working with, on a more personal level, with also without being intrusive, right? I think that you hear the Zoom fatigue, the WebEx fatigue, the virtual meeting fatigue. So how do we kind of manage those boundaries?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've got to just not start every meeting launching into the topic of that meeting, and just hold space. I took on this new role about 5 months ago, and there was just a lot of assumptions when I, joined a call, that I knew who everybody was. I'm like, I don't know who half the people are on this call. And I'm actually just gonna stop. Everyone's like launched into the topic, and I'm like, could we just do introductions, please? And be the person that does that, guys. If you think like, hang on a second, do these two people know each other? Because that's super awkward. Because when we're
Mhm,
talking about authenticity, you can only show up and be authentic if you have trust. And trust
Mhm.
comes from those work friendships, right? Like the ability to kind of say, I know you, I know who you are, and I've heard your voice, I know, what you're about, and therefore trust you, and therefore I can be a little bit more authentic about who I am with you. And so that chain is really, really important. But I think in this, we see the topic of the meeting, we click the button to join, and we launch into the meeting without spending time in that space just talking and engaging together. I think leaders own a lot in this space as well. I
Mhm.
think, leaders need to be enabling this. If you're a leader and you're listening to me right now and you've had somebody join during the pandemic, I actually have a direct report that joined yesterday, right? And so we're giving her time to set up a laptop, do all these things. And then, we're really thinking about, okay, what's her onboarding plan? Who's she going to learn from? And
Mhm.
then who's going to be her friend? Who's going to pick up the phone and be like, hey, let's just have a virtual coffee. How are you getting on? Did you manage to get your laptop set up? Like, what do you need? Right. And so
Mhm.
leaders, I think you have to, whatever onboarding plan you had prior to the pandemic, you have to throw that out and start again and really think intentionally about what that looks like. And I think we also have to make time for our employees to make these connections. We're very fortunate within Cisco. We get given a benefit of 40 hours a year to do give back and give back to communities and things like that. And so, we're all busy, and I'm looking at how much my organization is using that as a benefit, and it's, we could do better. And so we're like, okay, there is a week coming up where all of you are going to find a time, and if it's safe to do so from a pandemic perspective, and there's little hubs of people kind of all over the world, get together and give back to the community. That's an important thing that we owe doing. Um, look for opportunities, I think, like that. And leaders have to set the tone around that. Leaders have to say, this is important because, yes, it's important we give back, and it's important you guys hang out together. Again, ideally in a safe environment. It's really hard to do that over the last 2 years, but I think that's really important. Leaders have to support and own the fact that we have to feel a sense of belonging, and that sense of belonging comes from, you know, knowing people, building the trust, and then being able to be authentic.
I absolutely love that. And I think that intentionality is so important, right? A lot of people coming into a new organization don't even know where to start, especially when you have, huge organizations that are highly matrixed. It's like, how do I even find that friend? So I love that. I agree that I think that the leaders of the organization are really responsible for kind of playing matchmaker to start and helping them form those friendships and that feeling of belonging. One of the things that you said earlier, you mentioned, and it also really sits with me because I have a 19-month-old and a 5-month-old now, is having children during COVID and your experience as a parent during this time and how that's impacted your work. You mentioned bringing your 2-year-old onto a call with your boss. How did becoming a parent during this time change how you think about work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I was 8 months pregnant when the pandemic hit. And so, I feel pretty hard done by in terms of my pregnancy cravings of certain flavors of ice cream. It's just not possible because you go to the store and there was nothing there, right? So I felt like pretty hard done by in that sense. I think I have a bit of a unique story in terms of becoming a parent during the pandemic. In that, yes, I was, kind of 8 months pregnant. The pandemic hit. I had a baby boy in April, end of April, and we really struggled. My parents couldn't. My parents are in the UK. I'm married to an Australian. His family are in Australia. We had no family help, right? And we really struggled. We couldn't feed him, and I'm kind of like every time I go into the hospital, it got to the point where the hospital would say to me, I think it's your anxiety. Why don't you let your husband feed your child? And I really doubted myself. I was like, it's me. I'm a terrible mother. This is it. I've screwed up. My husband has to feed my baby. I'm just not good at this. And it was at his 8-week checkup. And I'm going to preface this, what I say next, with saying he's absolutely fine and thriving now. But at his 8-week checkup, we discovered he had a heart murmur. And fast forward to 10 weeks old, he was in open heart surgery for a really large hole in his heart. And that was what was causing the feeding problems, the struggles. But that like taught me a lot in terms of how I approach my work, because I realized that what the doctors were seeing is they were somewhat marginalizing me as, again, anxious mother, neurotic mother, labeling me as that because I wasn't an SME, I wasn't a doctor, I was a first-time mother. Oh my gosh, I heard that phrase with like disdain almost.
Mhm.
I realized that, in how that influences how I work as a person. When we talk about INC, I really understand now so much more vividly what it's like to be in a room saying, this is my experience, and someone telling me, no, 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 this is your experience. You're wrong. And I now, me and my colleagues, as we talk about our INC initiatives, we've almost got this kind of renewed like sense of like it can't just be, that's a big part of any organization that is hiring. This has to be front and foremost of what you're doing. So it's a big part of what we talk about. But for me and my work at Cisco, I'm again really lucky I work for a company that doesn't just say, okay, we're just gonna, have some goals and like, we're like, how do we then, if we're hiring people in, how do we make that experience then? How do we enable them? Because something's got to change in how we enable and support and make sure that environment is a positive environment and not just say, oh, you're having a hard time. Well, you shouldn't be having a hard time because everyone else is having a great time. And so I just, that to me became really real. And just these unconscious or conscious biases that people put on us, neurotic mother, an anxious mother, so much more aware of like how biases impact how you move through society. And so I'm lucky I have a very thriving 2-year-old now. But yeah, I think that it also, so not just, I think, being a parent and going, wow, this is really hard. So a lot of my team laugh when I'm like, guys, how do you do it? This is really hard. They're like, we've been telling you this for years, Zohra. I like, it's really hard. I've not slept last night. But also I think in what I try to do from an inclusion perspective, just really having that firsthand experience of being so marginalized and so kind of like I felt like I was on the outside looking in on a situation and going, why is nobody listening to me? No, why is no one accepting that this is my experience? And oh, it must be me. I've done something wrong. Like I really want to live in a future where we don't have to worry about that.
Absolutely. Well, first, I want to say I'm so glad that your son is okay. And I can only imagine at 10 weeks old how terrifying that must have been for you. Like you said, I have 2 little boys, and fortunately, we've, outside of a couple of COVID scares, have been completely healthy. But it is, as a first-time parent, I think that narrative of, especially as women, we're the worriers, that, we've switched pediatricians a couple of times with my first son because I got that feedback as well of you're over analyzing it, you're overthinking, and it's, and you believe them because they're doctors. My husband's a doctor as well. And so I was just like, that's what I've been trained to do. So I so appreciate that experience, and tying it back to how it impacts work and how you're thinking about belonging and inclusivity in the workplace, I think is so important. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit because I did not prepare you for this one, but I have a running list of books now to read based on the recommendations from the previous panelists and previous speakers. So I'd love to pose that question to you as well. If you had to recommend an article or a book or a podcast that has just impacted the way you think about your career or success in your career, do you have one that you would recommend to the audience?
Do I have to stop at one, Karen? In addition to how to potty train and all these other exciting books I'm sure you're reading at the same time. Okay, I actually, it's a book I have on my desk, and I share it with people all the time. And it's an author, her name is Elizabeth Day. She actually has a really good podcast, which is a little bit easier, I think, sometimes to consume. But it's a book called How to Fail. And I just don't think we do that enough. I don't think we feel comfortable in failure. I think we struggle with that. Her podcast is wonderful. It kind of interviews different people. Like when you hear like Barack Obama, how did you fail? You just assume that's somebody that doesn't really think about that. But it's really interesting to think, how do you fail? We are going to fail. How do you fail is the important, right?
Yeah.
And so that would be a book I would recommend. It's really a really great read.
Fantastic. Okay, a couple of questions are coming in. So on the, Anna is asking, so on hybrid future, do you have examples of successful hybrid meetings? And her just context, she said she's yet to see a hybrid meeting that's been more successful than fully live or fully virtual, which I can imagine that's a challenge across the board. So any tips or tricks that you would say that have worked well for hybrid meetings?
Yeah, that's a great one. I think we're learning, right? Cisco just opened up our offices beginning of this month. And so we're going into that kind of like, how do we do this? I do think, our technology is really going to help us power what that looks like. And I think we have to plan for that. We have to know that that's going to happen because you can't. I actually had a friend of mine have an experience the other day where they were having an in-person meeting and for medical reasons she couldn't be there and she was just dropped off the agenda. And I think that can't be how we do work in the future. So to answer the question, I haven't necessarily seen how we've been able to do that really successfully, other than, again, I'm really lucky I work for Cisco. I'm here this week with a colleague actually live because we've got some transformational work to break through, and I needed a call from my other colleagues, and so we have these huge wonderful screens that we're able to plug in a meeting room, and two of us are live and one of us, it feels like he's sitting at the other end of the table, right? And so we're really lucky. I know not everybody has access to that kind of technology, but I do think technology needs to be really thoughtful as it progresses into that work environment. And I think historically we've either planned for fully virtual or fully live. I think we're going to have to look at what that looks like. I know Cisco is, but that would be, I guess, what I'm saying is we're learning, and we're going to need to learn like what's hard in this. Right? If there's snacks in the room and somebody at home is like, I'm starving, but you're all munching down on pastries. I mean, little things like that. We need a break. Oh no, let's just work through lunch because we've all had, lunch delivered in the room. Like, what does that look like? And I think that we're going to have to go through the next year with open minds and think about it. And I think that's what's going to make the meetings better, is if we're all thinking, how could we have made that meeting better? And thinking about the tweaks and changes. I think it's a behavior we're going to have to open our minds to.
Fantastic. And then one last one. So if you had to leave the group with one last piece of life advice, what does that look like?
Okay, anyone that knows me is going to be bored of my life advice, but I say travel, prioritize travel. I know travel's really hard, it's expensive, especially at the moment, right? But I would say so much of my life, so much of my life perspective has come from experiencing what it's like to live in East Africa, and then experiencing what it's like to live in the UK, and not everyone can do that journey. Like, not everyone's like crazy like me and it's like, yes, I'll move constantly. But to travel and to find yourself, with your mindset immersed in a culture, a geography, or a climate situation that is so different to where your perspective and where you're coming from, and that opportunity, if you're going to travel, you've got to do it open-mindedly to learn and to experience. But try to do that immersively, and you don't have to physically travel. Like, I'm reading a really good book at the moment called Destination Wellness, another one for your list, about like how different people in different parts of the world interact with like their environment and how that helps them from a health perspective. So in my mind at the moment, I'm in Jamaica and Norway, and I'm learning and I'm being active in that. And so that's the kind of life advice I give to folks, because the more you experience in the broader context you have, the more you realize that you're a pretty awesome human being and you've got a wonderful place in this world, and there's a lot you can do, a lot of good you can do. And I think more people need to recognize that and realize that it's a great way of getting out of your habits, and just thinking a little bit more broadly. So if you can, and if it's safe to do so, and you can do so, without impacting the environment, kind of too much, I think going and trying to experience different cultures is really important.
Fantastic. And I see questions coming in. So the two books are How to Fail by Elizabeth Day and Destination Wellness. So Zohra, thank you so, so much. It has been a pleasure speaking with you today. We so appreciate you and your time